10 years of being in prison taught me to distinguish people by their silence. Some are silent out of fear, others out of pride, and the third group because they simply don't care. But it was only in the seclusion of the taiga that I met a person whose silence was deadly. Every word he uttered could lead to the death of his family thousands of kilometers away. My name is Viktor Pavlovich Medvedev. I am 39 years old, and for the past year, I have been working as a hunter guard in the Beria Nature Reserve. The previous 10 years were spent as a guard chief in a strict colony on the banks of the Amur River. I stood watch, counted the prisoners in the evenings, and listened to the creaking of the steel gates behind me. I thought that this routine would continue for the rest of my life, from one shift to another. My last year in the Guard was filled with transporting prisoners, problems, and exhaustion. In January of '93, I met Kolya Savchenko, a young man in his 20s, convicted for stealing food for his sick mother. He died in my arms as we tried to lift logs for timber harvesting. He only asked me to tell his mother that he had found a job and everything was fine. After that incident, I submitted a resignation report, but the authorities wouldn't let me go. Experienced staff was needed. But I couldn't go back to the zone. My wife Lyudmila understood me. She herself had served 3 years, marrying a drug dealer who betrayed her. She knew what disappointment was. The job offer as a hunter came from a former colleague. The Beria Reserve was looking for specialists with experience in firearms and willing to live in isolation. The salary was symbolic, but housing and food were provided. For me, who sought to avoid contact with people, it was exactly what I needed. By '93, the funding for the reserve began to dry up. Salaries were delayed by 3 to 4 months, and patrol fuel was given out sparingly. The queues in the taiga only grew longer. People came here out of desperation, those who were exiled or who had lost everything. Former engineers learned to set traps, and former teachers broke frozen ground in abandoned mines. In February '94, I learned about places in the taiga where people run to bears' dens for safety. And when such people look you in the eyes, you realize they are just like us. February 23rd started as usual. I woke up at 5 a.m. from the cold when the stove was almost out. The thermometer showed -38 degrees, which was tolerable after -50 last week. I lit the stove, put on the kettle, shared with Lyudmila. She had been living with me at the edge of the world since November, when she was evicted from the city. I no longer worked in the prison system, but there were no other housing options for a former inmate. And here she came, convicted only by gratitude and a single bag. We were both people twisted by fate, with nowhere to go. Perhaps that's why we found each other. Being a woman at the edge of the world was tough, but it would have been worse in the settlement. Small towns don't wash away the stains of the past, but here, in the taiga, it no longer mattered. While we were having breakfast, she remembered that today was a special day, Russian Army Day. I just smirked, noting that holiday violators don't appreciate it, and the well-fed one from yesterday noticed fresh tracks. Someone was setting traps again, and it worried me more than any holiday. I stepped out at 6 in the morning when it was still dark outside. I grabbed a Chinese flashlight. I knew the batteries would die quickly in the cold, but I had no other choice. 4 kilometers to Daruchier through the decay if I went straight. The snow was knee-deep, making it difficult for me to move, especially when I reached the first markers, getting soaked through despite the cold. I immediately found the traps. 3 of them, professionally set on animal trails leading to the water. A steel trap as thick as a pinky finger. A cunning trigger with a spring, it was clear that whoever set it knew their craft well. I cut off the trap, packed it in my backpack, although I knew it would be of little use. In the reserve office, no one had been there for 3 months. The director was on a bender after New Year's. And the local police officer, the only one in the entire district. What protocols could there be here? I stopped to rest by an old bear den. This inspection had become routine every year. Did the she-bear not wake up from her winter hibernation? This time something caught my attention. The snow at the entrance was disturbed, but not by bear tracks. It was as if a person had crawled on the ground. The tracks were fresh, from yesterday or the day before, no more. I shone the flashlight inside and the batteries died due to the cold. The beam of light illuminated only a part of the cave. In the darkness, something dark and motionless could be seen. At first, I thought the bear had gone far away, but then a moan came from the depths of the den. Quiet, but human. I crawled inside the den, which turned out to be not so high, and I had to get on all fours. The dry earth crumbled under my palms, the smell of rotting leaves and something sour and unpleasant filled the air. I remembered this smell from my military service. The infirmary always smelled the same when they brought in frostbitten patients. The flashlight flickered and went out. The batteries finally gave in to the cold. I reached into the darkness, feeling my way forward until I stumbled upon a piece of cloth. It was not wet, but icy, a padded jacket. I touched the shoulder, then the face, and under my touch, the eyelids twitched. He was still alive, barely. Dragging him through the narrow corridor was not difficult, like dragging a bag of bones. I grabbed onto roots. His head swayed, his hands moved lifelessly. From the convulsions I understood, here was the witness, a young creature about 25 years old, lips bluish, almost black, breathing barely noticeable, the number 347 in white paint on his clothes. The decision came quickly. Here, on my knees in the darkness, I saw the fatal outcome, how people freeze to the final point. First, they stop shivering, then they fall asleep peacefully, calmly, and never wake up again. I put the body on my shoulders and ran to the edge. These 40 kilograms felt like 100 weight on my shoulders, 3 kilometers in the snow with a living body on my back. Not for the faint-hearted. I stopped every 200 meters to catch my breath, to lighten the load. He kept coming to his senses, trying to say something, but all I could make out was, "Doctor," and "help." These were the words he knew in the language. I crept to the edge, preparing for the final rest. Suddenly, Ludmila heard dogs barking, went out onto the porch, and instantly understood everything. She spotted me, drained of my last strength and Korev in a semi-conscious state. Without saying a word in response, she helped drag him into the hut. She laid out an old sheepskin coat on the stove while I tried to recover. Lyudmila cleaned Korev from the battle scars with alcohol and brought out the most valuable supplies. His back was covered in wounds, both fresh and old, and Lyudmila, after examining them, shook her head. She realized that such marks did not come from ordinary work. She had only seen similar things in the zone when extracting information or imposing sometimes cruel punishments. We tried to restore his health, feeding him tea with honey as much as we could. By evening, his temperature began to drop. Throughout the evening, being by his side, we took turns delirious and feverish. Lyudmila changed the compresses each time, while he started to open his eyes with alcohol to avoid suffocation. His pulse calmed down, his breathing evened out. The fever gradually subsided, and he felt that thanks to us, he would survive, giving him a strange relief. On the third day, the Korean finally came to full consciousness. He sat up and looked at us with terrified eyes, as if at startled animals. He tried to get up but couldn't. Many couldn't handle such a situation. Lyudmila brought a piece of bread, fed him in small portions, and he ate with an unbearable appetite, clearly having recently suffered from hunger. His name was Kim Jong-soo. Our Russian was weak, so we communicated more with gestures and rough sketches on paper. Lyudmila understood a little Korean. In the zone, she befriended a Korean woman from Uzbekistan who taught her the basics of the language. Piecing together his story bit by bit, we learned that everything was much worse than I had expected. Kim worked as a lumberjack in the forest. 50 people in a cramped barracks with very little space. Their food consisted of only thin broth and sour cabbage. Meat was a rarity. Each of them had a quota, 10 cubic meters of trees per person per day, and this was in freezing temperatures when the trees were as hard as rocks. Failing to meet the quota resulted in punishment. 3 died a week before his escape, 2 from illness, 1 from a falling tree. They were buried without any funeral rites, simply buried in the forest. Kim escaped after being beaten 5 times for not meeting the quota. He realized he would not survive more than 1 punishment. Sneaking out of the barracks past the sleeping guards at night, he headed into the forest. For 3 days, he hid in the taiga, surviving on tree bark and snow. He found a bear's den and crawled in, thinking he could warm up and regain strength there. But he did not anticipate how strong the frost would be. On the 5th morning, dogs started barking in the distance, and he immediately understood: visitors. Lyudmila looked out the window and shuddered. An old gas truck was approaching the gate. 2 people got out of it. A Russian man in his 40s wearing a worn-out telegreka and an Asian man in a leather jacket over a sweater. Stepan Klopov, a foreman from the forestry enterprise, a former prisoner convicted of murder during a drunken brawl, was released in '89 and formed his own crew from former inmates. Officially, they were involved in logging, but in reality they controlled all the processes, providing for the Koreans and security. The second man introduced himself as a translator, Pak Sen-chol from the Korean community in Khabarovsk. Polite, beaming with a smile, without a trace of an accent, but Lyudmila suddenly felt tension in the air. His gaze was sharp, like that of a cunning fox observing how to end the hunt. Klopov steered the conversation towards Dalikamal. An unpleasant incident had occurred in the camp. One of their workers, a Korean comrade, had gone missing. He ventured into the woods well prepared, and his search had been ongoing for 3 days. Maybe I saw him, stocky Asian, in a work robe with a number. I calmly replied that I hadn't encountered anyone in my area. I regularly chased away poachers, and I hadn't seen any Koreans with my own eyes. Klopov nodded understandingly, slowly excusing himself. He offered a cigarette. I declined. I hadn't spoken to Nikolay since he left the colony. Pak spoke respectfully, his gaze scanning around as if searching for something unusual. And then, as if by chance, he mentioned the promised reward for the fugitive's arrest, $1,000 from the Koreans. They're making good money these days when earning money isn't so easy. And if someone hides the fugitive, Pak continued quietly, he will face troubles, and not just him. Kim's friend in Pyongyang has a family, a young wife, a 5-year-old daughter, an elderly mother. They all await his return after work. It would be very sad if he doesn't come back. It will be terrible for everyone, especially for the little girl. The threat was evident, as clear as day, but I stood my ground, knowing nothing, unable to help. At that moment, Lyudmila came to the porch, calling us for lunch. Klopov nodded, Pak bowed politely. Parting ceremoniously, we got into the car and drove off, leaving behind an uneasy silence. Kim had been hiding in the basement all this time, heard something, and silently hid himself. When the car left, he emerged trembling. Fear pierced him, not from the cold of winter, but from fear itself. He pointed to the door, ran his hand across his throat. The gesture couldn't have been clearer. They will kill him when found, and not just him. In the evening, with Lyudmila, we had a heavy conversation. Sitting at the table, she asked directly, "How many deaths have I witnessed in 10 years in the colony?" I couldn't answer. I had never counted. I had seen too much for one lifetime. And how many times could I have helped but didn't, she continued. How many times did I pass by, silent in front of the authorities? I was silent because there were no words. My task was to maintain order, uphold discipline. I didn't need to judge right from wrong. I was just a cog in the system, a mere executor. An opportunity has arisen, said Lyudmila, to do the right thing. For all those I didn't save, didn't help. To help someone break free, and perhaps it will be acknowledged. I didn't sleep all night. I was tossing and turning. On one hand, the law is the law. The fugitive had no right to freedom. On the other hand, what authorities? Only one local police officer for the entire reserve. The management doesn't show up for months. And the thugs with their cronies, they are not authorities, but criminals enriching themselves at the expense of others' misfortune. That's how it is. And most importantly, this guy is not a criminal in the usual sense. He came out of the pen and was sent for legal work, but turning him into a slave there, making him work to exhaustion, that's a completely different story. Work until you drop dead. If you can't, die faster. Make room. That's what popped into his head when he got up in the middle of the night and went out onto the porch, where the frost immediately burned his face. The star of Veselinisk, as majestic as the one he saw in his childhood in Belarus. He lit a cigarette, his hands trembling, holding the match. But his hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from understanding what he was about to do. Entering the barn, he lit a kerosene lamp on a sack of fur. The sables looked at him with empty eyes. He remembered each of them, from whom he took, from whom he confiscated. Like this big male from Kosoy's trap he confiscated in November. He almost cried, begged to let him go, mentioned his sick wife, but he didn't give in. The law is the law. The furs belong to the state. And now he was going to steal from this state which doesn't need these pelts, which hasn't paid salaries for the 4th month, and generally prefers to ignore the reserve. Returning to the hut at dawn, he saw Ludmila sitting by the stove, warming her hands with a cup of tea. She looked at him attentively and understood everything without words. She only said that she would go to the Chinese herself. It would be easier for her to bypass unnecessary questions in women's clothing. In the morning, a decision was announced. They planned to transport the furs to Khabarovsk. There is a South Korean consulate there, which might help the compatriot. Or hire defenders, some kind. He read in the newspapers about the emergence of organizations helping refugees. Ludmila nodded and told her plan. She has an acquaintance in Chikdamine working in a station cafeteria. Through her, they can contact a train conductor who transports illegal immigrants, Chinese, Vietnamese, and will bring the Korean if paid well. He asked how much is needed. She replied, $500, at least, maybe more. $500, that's 4 of his monthly salaries if he ever gets paid. And then he remembered about the confiscation. In the shed lay a fur coat taken from a poacher over 2 years of work, 12 sables, 30 squirrels, several minks. According to the instructions, he was supposed to hand everything over to the reserve office, draw up acts, receipts. But where is this office? Director Semenov hasn't been in touch for the 3rd month. The accountant went to her daughter in Khabarovsk for New Year's and never returned. He showed Lyudmila the fur. She froze. It was real wealth in these times, especially sable. She said there's a man in the village who can help. Semen Kitayev, a middleman. Not gentlemanly, but reliable. He buys fur from local hunters and delivers it to the city. They met with Kitayev 2 days later in the village, in an old bathhouse on the outskirts. The weight of the fur was on his back, and his heart was pounding as if after a forced march. For the first time in his life, he was consciously breaking the law. No rules or instructions, just a criminal code. Kitayev turned out to be a calm and businesslike man. He examined the fur for a long time and carefully checked its quality. He stood there as if dying. His throat was dry. His palms were sweaty, just like Kasov's when he smuggled because of him. In the end, Kitayev hinted sympathetically. The beautiful fur, neatly tanned, was stored properly. He asked directly, without hesitation. State confiscation? I had to confess. Kitayev smiled and shook his head. Harsh times. Everyone survives as they can. You, for example, trade in furs that are useless to the state. And the director of your reserve provides reserve land for loggers. What do you think is worse? He counted the money slowly, as if deliberately prolonging the moment of my humiliation. Every banknote in his hands. For 10 years I caught thieves and poachers, and now I stand there with my hand outstretched selling stolen goods. He offered $400 for everything. I started bargaining. I needed $500. We agreed on $450 after much persuasion. When handing over the money, Kitayev casually asked in passing, "Are you not Korean or hiding from the forestry?" I heard that Klopov promises big money to whoever helps find him. I almost gave myself away in surprise, but I held back. I answered evasively. Security is scarce nowadays and costly. Kitayev indicated that he understood and offered a parting piece of advice. What's on your mind? I don't know and don't want to know, but hurry up with your decision. Klopov values money more than life, so he would sell even his closest one for $1,000. Finding a person is a matter of technique. He returned to the border by evening. Lyudmila had already arranged everything through her acquaintance. The conductor agreed to take the passenger without documents to Khabarovsk for exactly $500. The train will depart the day after tomorrow in the evening. The last car. After buying the tickets, the main problem remained: how to get Kim to the station unnoticed. In the village, everyone knows each other by sight. The appearance of a stranger will raise suspicions. However, Klopov was removed an hour later. Lyudmila proposed a brilliant plan. She has a certificate from the local hospital. Her friend is a paramedic, also from the area. She will write that her mother is in serious condition and they urgently need to take her to the city. And Kim will be hidden under blankets in the back, as if transporting an elderly sick woman. The day before departure, something unexpected happened. A quiet knock on the door. Not even the dogs barked. Pak was standing at the doorstep, the same interpreter, without Klopov. He looked worried. He entered, sat down at the table. Time was short, he said right away. Listen carefully. He told the story of how his family fled from North Korea in '53. They barely survived passing through China. Pak was born here, but he remembers the stories of his parents. His agreement with North Korea is coercive. He translates and helps with documents, but he feels sorry for them, especially for young people. He knows about Kim. Klopov is not stupid. He figured it out a long time ago, and he warned. In the morning, a commission from North Korea will arrive, and the inspection won't be easy. They are interested in the defector. It turns out Kim is not just a lumberjack. In the camp, he worked in a secret design bureau, developing military equipment. He knows things he shouldn't. You have 12 hours to disappear, Pak said, and left as quietly as he came. We left at 4 in the morning when it was still very dark. Kim lay in the back under blankets and an old tarp. He had no documents, only a certificate about his sick mother, and we had a few hours ahead of us. How seriously to face the fate that threatens everyone without exception. The first traffic police checkpoint passed calmly, as if not imposing their presence. Tired cops, hitting the road after a night shift, coldly checked the documents of each driver. They quickly glanced at the driver's license, without rummaging through the car and not making anyone freeze on the road. They didn't want to wander in the cold without extreme necessity. The second checkpoint surrounded us, leaving no choice, and suddenly my heart sank in my stomach. 3 patrol cars blocked the road, carefully checking everyone. The need for action was clear. Klopov had warned his subordinates that they would be stopped. The senior sergeant briskly approached the driver. His face seemed familiar, as if he had seen him at the market in a small town. He took the documents and studied each letter carefully, like a student. Then, looking up, he calmly said, "We will check your trunk." My heart stopped beating when the sound of blood rushed in my ears. The sergeant headed towards the back of the car, and it became clear to me that our Kim had been discovered, and this was the end for all of us. Suddenly, Lyudmila jumped out of the car, falling into the snow. She clutched her heart spasmodically, closing her eyes. I was momentarily stunned. My wife and I hadn't discussed anything like this. Her body struggled in the snowdrift. Her legs twitched. Foam covered her mouth. The cops rushed to her, trying to help, but she paled, and her head helplessly drooped. Someone shouted, "Call an ambulance!" Another demanded water. Panic gripped everyone. I approached the senior sergeant, managing to slip the last $50 into his pocket, whispering in his ear, "Commander, she will die in the hospital. Please don't delay." With a deft movement, the sergeant found the money, looked at Lyudmila dying in the snow, and then at me again. Seconds dragged on like eternity. Finally, he waved his hand irritably. "Get out of here quickly so you don't become unnecessary," he said. I lifted Lyudmila, dragged her into the car, and swiftly drove away, making the wheels get stuck in the snow. A couple of kilometers later, she opened her eyes, smiling crookedly. In these life conditions, you can learn important lessons. They don't accept imposters there. However, sometimes survival is impossible without it. The key is to land correctly and not bite your tongue. In Khabarovsk, the address was quickly discovered by human rights activists. Lyudmila had found out everything in advance. Olga Semenovna Markova, a 60-year-old woman with a weary but kind face, was there. She had been a dissident since the times of Brezhnev, serving time in the 80s for distributing samizdat. She welcomed Kima calmly, as if she met him every day, while the Koreans came for tea. He was examined, and she shook her head, pointing to the signs of beatings. "Let's try to pass through the spiritual channels of the church," she suggested. She had connections with the Catholic mission, which sometimes helped. Then through China to underground Christians in South Korea. The chances were only about 20%, but it was better than nothing. The main thing was to get him out of the country. The farewell was quick. There was no time to waste. At the last moment, Lyudmila put a small wooden figurine, a girl with braids, carved from a chip, into his pocket. The man explained through Olga Semenovna. He had carved her all the way in the trunk, rubbing his fingers to blood. Giving Lyudmila the figurine, he said something long in Korean and bowed. Olga Semenovna translated. He thanked for the help and hoped that if she managed to survive and reach South Korea, she would pass it on to his daughter about the Russian family that saved her father. And if she doesn't survive? Still grateful, as he would die remaining a free man, not a slave. We silently returned. Both of us realized we crossed the line. There is no turning back. I am no longer just an unfaithful shepherd, a guardian of law and order. I am a person who made a choice. Right or wrong. Time will tell, but there were no other options. 3 weeks later, early in the morning, there was a knock on the door. Klopov arrived with the police, brought a search warrant, and turned the whole apartment upside down, from the basement to the attic. They even searched mattresses and floors, shining a flashlight into the chimney. They found nothing, of course, but it was clear. Now I am under suspicion, maybe forever. A month later, Klopovs found a body in the woods with a pierced head. The official version, he fell drunk on the icy pavement and hit his head. But everyone in the village knew the truth. Koreans do not forgive mistakes. They got rid of the one who made a mistake, Korean-style vampire, as the French say. May of '94 began warmly. The snow melted within a week. The first flowers appeared. I sat in the evening, compiling a report on the inspection. There was a package on the table from Vladivostok, with no sender's address, but I knew who it was from. Inside was a small wooden figurine depicting a shepherd with a dog, carved with love for detail. In the face of the shepherd, you could see my features, with a kerchief and a straight nose with a wrinkle at the tip. Ludmila took the figurine, turning it in her hands, admiring the work. "Nicely done," she said. "Talented." I nodded. Kim Jong-soo was a bridge engineer. In Pyongyang, he designed bridges until he ended up in a camp. And it turned out that he built bridges not only physically, but also between people, overcoming borders, fear, and human laws. He placed the figurine on the shelf next to his mother's photograph. Sometimes I look at her and wonder, did he make it back to his native Korea? Did he meet the little girl for whom he carved figures in our cold attic? Or did he perish somewhere on the Chinese border, like many before and after him? There is no answer, and perhaps there never will be. But I did everything I could, once, in memory of all those I couldn't save during those 10 years behind bars. I thought the story with the Koreans was over, but in the winter a man appeared at my doorstep, the one I least expected to see. The very interpreter Pak, and this time he didn't come as an enemy. In January 1994, warm snow fell. The snow was falling, and the Tail River didn't completely freeze, murmuring along its course. Recently in the village, I was told that a hunter heard shots near the bear den area. It was a secluded place, not hunting time. There was nothing to see, but I decided to check. I walked along an old trail laid by geologists back in the 50s when they were searching for metals in this area. Silence reigned in the den. Only a raven somewhere far away was croaking mournfully. On the damp ground, I noticed tracks, human but somehow strange. Some of the tracks were left a couple of weeks ago, while others, fresh from yesterday or the day before. Examining them, I realized that the same person walks the same route regularly, like going to work. The man set off on a path that veered off the main trail half an hour later, leading him towards rocky cliffs deep into the wilderness. After an hour, he approached a low rocky outcrop, cracked with crevices. Against the backdrop of the gray sky, he saw something that would escape an ordinary glance. Following along one of the crevices, he noticed a thin wisp of smoke, almost imperceptible compared to the gray sky. Opening a possible entrance cleverly concealed by branches, moss, and even roots to create a false picture of incongruity, he discovered a door made of ancient planks. Stepping over the threshold, he found himself in an earthy hut with log walls and a low ceiling. The owners did not respond to his calls, and he understood that a hermit lived here. Order reigned in the hut, typical of solitary individuals. Every item was in its place without any unnecessary details. Icons hung on the walls, and a lamp burned in the corner. Under a blanket on the mats lay an old man with a gray beard and transparent thinness, breathing heavily and hoarsely. His eyes opened when he approached closer, and the old man met his gaze without surprise, as if he had been waiting for this meeting. The old man introduced himself as a gamekeeper and just nodded, saying it was good that the man had come. Calling him a messenger of God, He spoke with a clear but weak voice, demonstrating erudition and intelligence. Conversing with him, the man noticed the old man's warm forehead, rapid and irregular pulse, as well as wheezing in his breaths, indicating lung inflammation. Offering to take him to the hospital, the man heard a refusal from the old man, explaining that it was already too late. The old man did not want to return to ordinary life, and he asked to deliver a letter to his daughter, who worked as a teacher at Moscow School number 124. The daughter's surname was recorded as Stetsenko. Presumably, the old man named her Mikhail. He spent 20 years in a dugout, avoiding worldly affairs and hiding from the world. Without specifying which sins led him to this decision, he looked oppressed, as if burdened by weights that wouldn't let him rest. This unusual old man revealed a bit of his life to the man who stayed with him for 3 days. The old man would occasionally lose consciousness, coming to hours later in a delirious state, calling out the names Nikolai, Anna, and Sergei. In his darkest moments, he would beg for their forgiveness, shedding dry tears. But when his mind cleared, he would share fragmented memories of his life before secluding himself. On the evening of the second day, something strange happened. The old man suddenly woke up from his delirium. His eyes sparkled, and he spoke with a new, almost official voice, recounting a meeting with a geologist, a woman who had gotten lost in the fog. He helped her find the trail, and during their conversation, she told him about the tragic death of her mother, who passed away without medical assistance in a village. Before dying, I told my eldest daughter, the most mature one, what had happened to me. She learned that in 1970, someone helped me stage my death, saving me from those who wanted to kill me. My name was Mikhail. Then the old man fell silent, coughed, caught his breath, and continued in a calmer voice. It was me who saved her, although it seems like it was the other way around. I saved her, thinking I was incapable of saving anyone. That salvation led to a curse of solitude without assistance. For 20 years I pondered over this. I managed to save at least one innocent soul, and now it turns out there is blood on my hands. After that, I decided to confess everything. I was a lieutenant colonel in the 5th Department of the KGB. From 1970 to 1978, I carried out special missions, eliminating undesirable individuals, not just with a shot to the back of the head. It required the appearance of an accident. I used my knowledge of the Taiga, which I acquired since childhood. My father was similar to it. The fox became a victim of a fall from a cliff, the bear drowned in the river, the tax collector broke her leg, and Burilosha got lost and froze. 17 people in 8 years. I remember each one by name. The last task was to eliminate a teacher, 24-year-old Elena Vorobyeva. She refused to become the mistress of the first secretary of the party regional committee. An order was issued for her liquidation, to make it look like an accident in the forest where she went with her class on a field trip. But when I saw Elena, I understood. She was 5 months pregnant. I couldn't do it. For the first, and as it turned out, only time, I disobeyed orders. I helped her disappear, provided fake documents through my contacts, and started a new life for her. After that, I vanished. I knew it wouldn't be forgiven. People don't forgive such things. On the 3rd day after his death, I recorded our conversation in the dugout while the memories were still fresh. Father Mikhail asked for this. He wanted his consciousness to remain, not just in his daughter's letter. The letter lay in an old leather case sealed with wax. There was a notebook with a hard cover nearby. "You will read it after my death," the old man said, "and decide what to do. But make sure to pass the letter on to my daughter. She saw me for the last time when she was still a baby." At dawn on the 3rd day, Father Mikhail passed away. His last words were, "Lord, forgive." I closed his eyes, said a prayer, and then I didn't know what to do next in such a situation. I wrapped his body in a blanket and carried him out of the dugout. I spent the whole day digging a grave. The ground had already begun to freeze. I buried him in a Christian way as best as I could, with a cross made of 2 birch trees tied together with bark, and on the cross I carved with a knife, "Rest in peace, Mikhail, 1924 to 1994. I didn't write anything else. After the burial, I returned to the dugout and, unable to resist, opened the letter. My hands were trembling as I unfolded it, and my soul was trembling. In a clear handwriting of a military officer, there was a confession that made my blood run cold. The letter began with an apology to his daughters, followed by a list. 17 names with dates, places, and methods of elimination. Engineers, journalists, party workers suspected of disloyalty. I read and recognized the handwriting of a professional. Each operation was carefully planned, using natural conditions, leaving no traces. After the list of victims, there were the names of the clients. Not directly, but quite clearly. The deputy chairman of the regional party committee, later a minister, with detailed descriptions. 1. Former secretary of the city committee, now heading a neighboring region. The head of the KGB service, now a high-ranking lieutenant general. Through the stories of others, I learned, saw on the air. Great figures now rule in the new Russia. In the conclusion of the letter, he addressed his daughter again, asking not to judge harshly, explaining that he was just a small link in the system. However, after the incident with Elena Vrabieva, he realized that even a small link could refuse to perform its functions. He realized too late that the details of the operation, terrain plans, methods, and even some original documents were in the notebook. A professional to the core, he documented everything, but why he kept the mystery he did not disclose. Perhaps he knew that the time would come to answer. He whispered over the papers until late in the evening, then carefully put everything back, wrapped it in plastic. What to do with all this? No idea. People from the list of the deceased cannot be resurrected. The one who gave them the order is either dead or at the pinnacle of power. 2 days later, he returned to the frontier. Lyudmila met him in silence. He understood everything from her gaze. He shared the story of the old man with her, showed her the letter. She read it and turned pale. "It needs to be passed on to the daughter," she said after a long silence. "She has the right to know about her father, but the rest is none of our concern." There was no sleep at night, he pondered. On the one hand, the truth must be revealed. The families of those killed have the right to answers. On the other hand, besides the records, there is only words but no evidence. Inflating a scandal would only be self-defeating, with no benefit. And here is the old man's daughter. How will she find out that her father was part of this network? A week later, he made a decision to compromise. He wrote a letter to his daughter where the father acknowledged his mistakes and asked for forgiveness. No details, no specifics. Just worked in the authorities, carried out orders he regretted. And asked for forgiveness for trying to protect but failing. He kept the documents hidden. However, something happened as he expected. On the 10th day after the old man's death, Mikhail, his father's nephew, met him unexpectedly. A young man around 35 years old, well-groomed, well-dressed, he asked about his strange uncle, saying the family was worried. It dawned on him. By evening, he arrived at the border, introduced himself as Andrei Mikhailovich, saying he was getting a job at some Moscow institution. He was looking for information about the old man. No one had seen or heard of him. I gave vague answers. After all, how many hermits can there be in the forest? I don't know them all. The nephew was persistent. He mentioned that his uncle might have important documents and valuable artifacts of the family history. He was willing to pay for information. When he realized that money wouldn't interest him, he changed tactics. He mentioned that the authorities were interested in the fate of the former employee. After his departure, Lyudmila said what I had already thought. This person was not the nephew he decided to verify through his contacts. He got in touch with a former colleague in Khabarovsk. He found out information. It turned out that 2 days before the nephew appeared, he had requested data in Moscow from an old acquaintance, Stetsenko. And right after the request, someone from Moscow started to find out who and why was inquiring. It became clear that the KGB was still monitoring past sins. It's not surprising. People from the list of the deceased now have a high status. They don't want a scandal. 3 days later, they officially came for him. Mysterious agents of the Federal Security Service suddenly appeared in the secretive landscapes of Shtatsky Trov. Their credentials were like a millstone. A mature colonel in his 50s, with gray hair and a stern look, stated his intentions directly and clearly. Their goal was to find the confidential data left by the former official, Stetsenko. The search was conducted professionally, but nothing was found. I managed to hide the documents in a secret hiding place in the forest, which I had prepared from the very beginning. The colonel was clearly dissatisfied with the search results. He took me aside while his subordinates were loading the car. The colonel's words were barely audible. "We have an understanding, we are both warriors of the soul. No one is accusing you, but if Stetsenko's secret documents are revealed, it will be bad for everyone, especially your family. A lot is at stake. Just think about it." The colonel offered his phone. "If you remember or discover something, call. We will find a common solution." After they left, it dawned on me, time waits for no one. I had to hurry to my daughters before the door closed forever. Lyudmila supported the mature decision, and 2 days later we set off to Khabarovsk, then to Moscow. We bought tickets with a one-day difference. Perhaps it sounds paradoxical, but after visiting the FSB, one can only live in a state of constant vigilance. Moscow greeted us with noise and hustle. After the silence of the Taiga, the city seemed like a constantly bustling anthill. We found the school quickly. It was an ordinary district school on the outskirts. The principal was initially unfriendly, but the confidence and seriousness in my voice somehow changed his attitude. He informed me that Vera Mikhailovna was currently teaching a class in the 5th grade and would finish soon. I stood in the hallway, surrounded by children's drawings on display boards, hearing the bell, noise, and children pouring out of the classroom. A middle-aged woman with a tired but kind face and dark hair came out of the room. Seeing me, she approached and asked a question. I introduced myself, said that I brought a letter from her father. Her face suddenly paled. She leaned against the wall, lost in thought. Her father had passed away long ago, in 78. She agreed to talk outside of the school, and we went to the nearest green clearing. I handed her the letter from Mikhail, told her about our meetings. The letter contained only words of a repentant heart, without details of sins. She read it with emotion, tears moistening her cheeks. My father, I barely remember him, only his hands big and warm and the smell of his knees. Her mother rarely mentioned him, saying he had gone on a long business trip. Then they were told he had died. As for her salvation, I told her that he had tried to save and help them hide, but fate had its way. Her mother passed away when I was 7 in the village where we moved. My younger brother followed her. The story of someone trying to save them, but who exactly, remained a mystery. We just sat in silence. Then she asked where her father was buried. I drew her a map. She promised to come in the summer when she had time off. In memory, I gave her a wooden cross I had carved from birch bark on the train. My father was a believer. He prayed for you every day. It's true, I said. Upon returning to Khabarovsk, I had a chance encounter at the train station, where I came across a familiar face. There, by the newspaper kiosk, stood the same FSB colonel, pretending to be engrossed in reading a Komsomol newspaper. He briefly caught my eye, nodded slightly in greeting. I realized they had checked me and knew where I had been. However, they didn't stop me. Apparently, they deemed it enough to deliver the letter to the daughter without unnecessary details, so that family matters remained within the family. In the spring of 1995, I went to the old man's dugout. I was determined to fix the cross and perhaps erect some additional monument over the grave. Arriving at the site, I found a dug hole and searched for hidden items. To my relief, no one had touched the grave yet. I restored the cross, surrounded it with stones. However, the old man's documents are still kept in my hiding place. I packed them in a wallet, then in a leather case, which I placed in an airtight can from under the cartridges. I cleverly recorded the coordinates in a secret diary using a code only understandable to me. Before his death, he ordered not to touch it until 2025. Maybe in 30 years it will be possible to uncover the whole truth. Perhaps by that time, all the participants in this story will have passed away, and there will be no one to defend them. But it is also possible that there will be interested parties. Time will tell. Sometimes I think about Father Mikhail. His fate was strange. For 8 years he killed on orders. Then for 20 years he repented, saved one life, sacrificing his own. And in the end, he found no refuge even here. They say you can't escape fate, but he tried. Perhaps this, too, carries some meaning. Now on my shelf, there are 2 wooden figurines. One is a gift from the saved Korean named Kim. The second one, I carved myself after that story. An old man with a book in his hand, looking into the distance, his face expressing calmness, but also hidden sorrow. That's how I remembered Father Mikhail on his last day. Sometimes Lyudmila asks me if I regret revealing the truth. I can't give a definite answer. Maybe it was an act of cowardice, but perhaps it was also wisdom. You can't bring back the dead, so why bring unnecessary troubles to the living? His daughter has a family, children studying in school. They will learn that their grandfather was persecuted. What should they do next? The taiga holds many secrets. I am learning from it.